All right, hi everyone. Today is Wednesday, March 20th. This is the Kubernetes SIG Cloud Provider bi-weekly meeting. We have a pretty short, or not short agenda. We have a few items, but each of them might take a bit. So the first one is by Nishi, and she's going to be leading the discussion around the proposal that's going around to consolidate some of the provider SIGs in the Kubernetes community. Nishi, why don't you go ahead and, or you know what, I'll share my screen and then we can kind of do a walkthrough of the proposal right now.
Sure.
I have a lot of windows open.
I can share it. Or
there, can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think the general idea here was the cloud provider initiative is supposed to extend generic APIs to all the controller managers for different infrastructure providers. And through the cloud provider, we just want to have some form of standardization to all the interfaces and also drive some form of coordination between the infrastructure providers as they build controllers for different elements that would relate to node or routes or services per se, or any custom controller that an infrastructure provider might have. Plus, we also have goals on testing and a generalized release cadence that can also ensure quality of all the controllers that are being published for the infrastructure providers. So this was a summary of what we wrote down, and we discussed it with the leads for each of the SIGs: AWS, Azure, and GCP, IBM Cloud, OpenStack, and VMware. And essentially, all of us agreed that the idea makes sense, and that folding all the projects under SIG Cloud Provider would help us get the quality and standardization that we want across the code base, across testing, release cadence, and documentation. So we went and spoke to each of the leads. As you can see, they've written down whether they agree or disagree. And we had a bunch of conversations since Jan 28th, and today was March 17th or March 19th. So it's been an ongoing quarterly exercise. We've cleaned up the proposal. Andrew, if you could go down a little bit. So instead of proposing the cloud providers, which is all the infrastructure providers, as user groups, because the definition of user groups is you cannot own any code, we're suggesting that cloud providers will be organized as sub-projects to say cloud provider. So essentially nothing changes much. The cloud providers, the individual providers will have sessions at KubeCon. You can have a user group session, which is more informal. It'll probably be shorter. We have to exactly figure out what the cadence will look like. There is a suggestion that, say, cloud provider might have a longer session so that other provider leads or anyone who has a general standardization that they're driving can come and give an update. So that's section number one. A lot of people had worries about losing the user group sessions at KubeCon. That's not going to go away, but we will have to discuss this with CNCF, and we'll get that done once we have approval for this proposal. The other thing is the meeting cadence, the bi-weekly meeting cadence, the Slack channel, and Zoom. We don't expect anything to change. All we are saying is we'll just label it as provider. What that means is provider ending by the infrastructure provider's name. On the quarterly community updates, one problem has been that, you know, some SIGs have something to offer, the other SIGs not really. Some SIGs have many sub-projects, others don't. So given this approach of folding all the sub-projects, we will propose that there'll be one slot for SIG cloud provider, and we have to figure out the exact approach to it. But instead of having 3 SIGs present in one community meeting, we'll just collapse the SIG, all the 5 or 6 cloud providers into one session and have a 30-minute session update in one format. And this will call for some coordination and testing between the cloud provider leads and the individual provider leads as well. But that's a proposal there. In terms of labels and notification, currently we have SIG Azure or SIG GCP or SIG AWS. That will change to provider AWS, provider GCP, so on and so forth. That also helps with the discoverability, and essentially in sigs.yaml, we will list all the projects as provider-AWS or provider-Azure. And instead of having a specific entry for the provider, for SIG Azure, you will have all these sub-projects entered under SIG Cloud Provider. So that's the change that's being discussed in item number 5 and 6. What we are also saying that none of the existing sub-projects will change their naming, because it's going to have impacts on the blogs and demos and other discoverability stuff that we don't want to deal with. And some sub-projects are actually used in production, which again could cause problems, especially if the names are being used in Docker containers, which will require us to do builds, and that's not something we want to go through right now. But for every new project, we are saying that the sub-project name can be anything. It should just end with the provider's name, which is again ending with GCP or ending with Azure or ending with AWS. And then whenever you create a new sub-project, you have to add some topics to the repository. And the suggestion is that topic becomes Kubernetes provider dash name of the provider, which is again something that contributor X will take care of, but that's our proposal. There was a discussion about sub-project release cadence. So the other issue is most of the projects that are happening in SIG providers, cloud providers, are out of tree features. And the major goal of this project was to make sure that any ecosystem related project that can add a plugin for users to have more comfort with the Kubernetes API, and any vendor product that they're working with, the interfaces have to go out of the core code base, and we have to make sure that these out of tree features are of high quality. So I did have that's open. Kubernetes SIG release team wants to only take care of in-tree Kubernetes features, which is K/K. And for all the added tree features, right now we don't have a resolution on who's going to take care of the release process or how it'll look like. The discussion has started in that issue that I'm referring to, and I'm not saying that that needs to be resolved within the scope of this proposal, but the idea is the cloud provider will have one release cadence, and the provider leads will be responsible for driving and owning that release cadence. I mean, in SIG AWS, we've been following it very, very carefully, going through the alpha, beta, GA release cycle for KK. And we're hoping that the same would be adopted by every other SIG, and that SIG cloud provider leads would help build that standardization. But then this is also something that's up for discussion. And the last item is test grid. And in test grid, each SIG provider has their own testing suite, and we have plugins which essentially implements non-blocking jobs, non-blocking to the release cadence. And what we're proposing is test infra should move all the tabs related to the providers under SIG Cloud Provider, and all the tests show up underneath that. So again, it's not a major change. It's just how it looks like, and it's all organized by the actual interfaces linking up to KK rather than by provider.
So just a note on that, we can like take power and do that ourselves. We don't have to wait for SIG testing to do that. Like as we organize that, we should feel free to update the boards.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's a good jump to the next topic, which is we're hoping that we can implement this in or start this process in KubeCon San Diego. So we have to go through this process of sending an email out and opening a PR so we can get any other inputs, any open inputs available at this point, and then we have to present to steering committee. So once that's done, Stephen, we can actually get going with execution, and that's a great idea. So that's the overall proposal, and the timeline is right there. If anyone has any questions and any objections, they can raise it now.
So my one comment is that I think that we can execute on it sooner than San Diego. I think but San Diego's November or something. I think that we can get a lot of this done sooner. The one note I had about the KubeCons was the way the SIG's organized, right? So whether or not you know, we have meetups for individual cloud providers or sub SIGs. That was the one point of contention that I was like, we've already submitted proposals, so we can't change anything on that side until San Diego. But everything else we can I think we can run with this.
Yeah, I don't think we need to do this in like one cut. I think the approach I would prefer to take is having San Diego as like the absolute deadline, where if providers aren't folded at that point, then we would just kind of, you know, cut the cord and fold everyone at once. But we can have like a window of time where providers can fold in optionally, and because I know like for like VMware, for example, kind of they would prefer to fold in earlier rather than later. So I don't think we need to do it in a single PR. Like we can kind of do this gradually as well.
Okay.
But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's also going to be a bunch of weirdness that shakes out from this, like moving changing repo names, figuring out what dependencies are. Like this is something that needs to be like Andrew was saying, like we can start sooner rather than later, because I think we're going to find some weirdness around this.
Yeah. But it would mean that for KubeCon NA, I guess like once this kicks into execution mode, then for KubeCon NA, we definitely have to make sure that there's no provider-specific SIG sessions, right? But we would have to just rebrand those as like sub-project sessions instead.
Yeah, user groups or whatever we want to call, but that's CNCF decision, and we'll have to start a thread to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what?
Yeah, go ahead.
So what's the discussion with user groups right now? Like, so I know the general idea is like we're gonna execute user groups once the kind of the governance model there is formalized. Do you have anything more on that, or is that kind of our stance right now?
Right now, that's the stance, but the idea is whatever is decided for the user group, we use the same format for KubeCon for the providers. And I was told that it's going to be a very informal session. I don't know what that means in terms of the session timeline or how it gets organized. So that's a execution question that we have to ask CNCF folks. I just initiated that thread, so I can figure that piece out.
Okay.
The other thing is each one should take one area and go ahead and implement. But we first have to open a PR and do an email and then decide when to steering committee if everyone's okay. And right after that, we can start executing.
Okay. I don't think we need to get everyone's, like, I think we can do the steering committee part first.
Okay.
But yeah, anyways, anyone else have questions on this or any issues they want to bring up? Going once, going twice, 3 times. Okay, great. So Nishi, April 3rd is when I'm aiming to have this sent. Like, so I'd like to book like a 15-minute slot on the next steering committee meeting. And then you and I, we can kind of do the same presentation we did right now. Just propose the kind of like walk through the proposal with the steering committee, and then we can give them like a few weeks to think over the proposal and see what else they may want to see what else they might want to change and go forward with that.
Sure. One thing that I was told was to open a PR simultaneously, just so it's there for everyone to see. So I would like to do that before we go to steering committee.
Yeah.
Okay, is that?
Yeah, I would say PR this proposal, and in tandem send it to the mailing list, and then attach the mailing list thread to the PR or the issue.
Yeah.
So is this a PR for SIG.YAML, or is this a PR that has the proposal in it?
I think it's an issue that has the proposal in it, right?
Oh, okay. Okay.
Just so everyone gets a chance to see it.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay,
Great.
cool.
Awesome.
All right. Okay, so let's go into 115 planning and grooming now. So what I've done.
Andrew?
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to drop off in a few minutes. Can I slip something into the agenda really quick? I'm sorry I didn't add it to the chart here.
Yeah, go for it.
So I just got an email from the CNCF saying that they're limited on space for KubeCon Shanghai, and so they're asking us to reduce our speaking time there. We had an 80-minute session that we proposed. So I just wanted to get a sense from the team here if they would prefer to have an introductory session or a deep dive in Shanghai, so that I can respond to Nancy and have the schedule updated.
So based on my experience going to Shanghai, I think an intro session might be better.
Okay.
Just because folks there are like I've noticed like most people that are at KubeCon in Shanghai, they're kind of on like the getting to know Kubernetes kind of part of the journey. So I think an intro session is probably better.
Okay. All right. That sounds great. I'm sorry to interrupt on the schedule there. I should have gotten it into the agenda.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so for so I wanted to spend the next 20 to 30 minutes doing backlog grooming for 115. So I think what's best for this is if we do multiple iterations of the backlog, so we have consensus, because we don't have everyone in the SIG on this call right now. So I was hoping we do kind of like one kind of quick pass of the backlog right now, and then maybe in the next SIG call or 2 SIG calls from now, we can do another iteration when we have more folks here. So what I've done is, so this is our current backlog. We have about 20 issues, 21 issues. Most of these are ported straight from issues in Kubernetes/Kubernetes, and some of them are new issues. What I'd like to do is go through each issue, add a milestone to it. So for milestones, we have 2 options. We have milestone next and milestone 115. So milestone 115 means we want to get it done in 115, and then milestone next is just kind of a placeholder milestone to kind of punt it to some other future release. And then label-wise, there's going to be a P0, P1, P2, P3. So P0 and P1 is issues that we definitely want to get done in 115, and then P2, P3 are nice to haves, but it wouldn't be the end of the world if we didn't get those into 115.
So question there. Is there a reason that we decided to go with the P number? That was actually something that was moved away from in the rest of the label sets, right? So they use priority instead of or rather, it used to be priority 0 through 2 or something like that, and they shifted over
Correct.
to critical urgent, important soon, and important long term. And there are a few other priority labels, but those are the commonly used ones.
Yeah, no reason in particular. I was copying I think it was a kubeadm backlog, and they had P0 to P4. I'm like, I'll use that. I have no problems using priority critical or whatever else the rest of the community is using. So it's critical urgent, priority long term, priority short term.
It's priority critical urgent, priority important soon, and priority important long term are the
Okay,
primary.
and then there's a backlog which would pretty much just be.
Yeah, so you usually sort the backlog by by the milestone and then the priority level. Right?
Okay. Do folks feel good about doing that for 115? Okay, cool. So let's start with issue 1, removing cloud provider dependencies in Kubernetes/Kubernetes. So this is something we started last quarter, which is removing all the internal dependencies in Kubernetes/Kubernetes so that we can so the reason we need to do this is because if we want to stage the providers, there can't be a circular dependency back into the core repository. So we have to make sure like every Go import in each provider is not linking back to Kubernetes/Kubernetes. So this issue is like pretty much almost done already. There's the credential provider that Mike and Tiffany is working on, and then there's util mount, which is Travis on my team is working on.
I think you can strike the credential providers off of this issue. The change Tiffany's working on actually will completely eliminate the need to extract those. Okay.
So this is sort of a checklist. So I guess once that change goes in, then we can kind of check it off, right?
I guess we could do it that way. It's kind of against the intent of this issue because there is no intent to migrate those two anymore.
Right. Right.
But
so
if you want to leave them on the list, I guess I don't object to that.
Yeah, like I just want the list to represent like the current state of the world. And as of today, there's still like that weird import we do to the credential provider. So we should leave that in there for now. I think for 115, this should be a priority critical urgent. I think we absolutely want to get util mount and the credential provider out in 115. Folks agree?
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
All right. Okay, so this is follow-up to the last issue. Once we have the internal dependencies out, we can then actually move all the providers to staging. There's actually a follow-up issue on this to support publishing each provider to their external repos using the publishing bot. This needs to be fleshed out a bit more, but the idea is that we're going to publish the providers in staging to a subdirectory on all the external repos. And that essentially gives providers option to import or not. Like essentially, like they can import the in-tree versions of their providers from the out-of-tree repos. I would like to put this in P0 as well for 115. Folks agree?
Yep.
Hey, Walter, we're just doing backlog grooming. So just to catch up quickly, first issue, which is removing the dependencies, we're gonna put that under P0, so most important for 115.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot the milestone for this actually.
Yeah, as part of this, we should also build, so we're kind of across the board or trying to push across the board org level project boards for SIGs. So this should probably end up in a project board as well.
Yeah, it's on my to-do list. I'll get that done soon. All right. So this same thing. Let's move this to 115 as well. Okay, great. Okay, kept for GAing cloud provider node labels. This is the KEP to promote all the beta dot labels for zone, region, instance type, all that stuff to GA. Folks have ideas on if they want this for 115, what priority this should be.
Important soon.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I guess we do want this in 115 as well. Any objections? All right. Consider alternatives for out-of-tree PV labeling. Okay, so this one has a bit of context. So I've been working with Michelle and SIG Storage, talking about what we want to do with the out-of-tree persistent volume labeler controller. So we actually removed this controller in 114 because we effectively found out that no one is using it and it was actually written incorrectly. So we either want to provide like some sort of a mutating admission webhook for this or something similar to that, which effectively replaces the admission controller in the API server. Folks have opinions on this. I know for out-of-tree providers, this is a bit more important, less so for in-tree because we have the in-tree equivalent in the API server.
Have we evinced an opinion as to where it would run?
Nope. So if it's a mutating admission webhook, I don't think we could run it in the CCM even if we wanted to. So it would have to be packaged externally.
I agree, and that's sort of what I was trying to get at. Is it sort of feels like with this sort of stuff we're heading towards almost needing a webhook manager.
Yeah, and I don't think API machinery that's not like going to happen anytime soon, right?
Depends if someone wants to volunteer to do the work. I don't think anyone in API machinery would object to someone doing it. I think you could probably fast track a KEP that suggests doing that. But everyone I know of working in API machinery is planned out for basically the next 2 releases.
Okay.
So I would, if people are interested in doing that, I would also get up with the SIG cluster lifecycle people, because some of the people who are working on cluster API are, I think cluster API is going to eventually move to something that's strongly webhook driven. So working with them might be a good plan.
Sounds good to me. I mean, the big thing I'm suggesting is just that it does sound like we might want to do that. I'd also suggest talking to, I think it's Solly, whose handle is escaping me right now.
DirectXman 12.
Yes, DirectXman 12. He's already got some suggestions about trying to classify things like critical from non-critical webhooks. And this seems pretty related to that.
Okay, so let's put this for important long-term. And
do we want to punt on the milestone though?
I think so. I think it might be worthwhile to update the issue to only be like having either a KEP or some sort of like discovery to at least figure out like what this might look like.
Okay.
So I'll just leave a note here. That's good enough. So yeah, milestone 15, important long term, and we'll update the issue to be scoped to either doing the investigation or actually like writing a KEP, and then we can execute on future releases. All right, improving AWS integration docs. I'm gonna go ahead and say that all the docs ones should be critical, urgent, and milestone 15. Anyone object?
Big +1 to that.
Okay, let's do that. 15. All Azure, and then GCE, OpenStack, vSphere, and I'm gonna assign this to myself. Cool. All right. Better cloud LB names. So this came up Q4 of last year. This is the issue to essentially use better, more descriptive names for when we create LBs for load balancers, or when we create LBs for services of type load balancer. So there was a PR merged that essentially lets you override the name, but then all the current providers are defaulting to the current name. So the biggest trick to this is like, how do we account for existing LBs that are already created? So we need to decide if we want to like either ignore those or try to like dynamically update the names.
There was a complication for this on the AWS side as well, and the name has a length limit. So that this one's kind of, it looked like it wasn't small when I looked at it in Q4, but I don't know how big it is, or I don't know if it's critical either.
Yeah, I think there are length limits on the Azure side too, but I think it's like a very long limit. So
yeah, the AWS one is 32 characters.
Okay. So it seems like milestone next would be appropriate for this. And we can just kind of, I guess, backlog. Because it doesn't seem like anyone's, I mean, it's not the best UX for users, but it's not breaking anything, right?
And I don't think we need it for the breakout effort.
Yeah, agreed.
no, yeah.
Sorry, do we need this for the breakout effort?
No, I'm saying I don't think we need it for the breakout effort.
Okay, yeah, gotcha. Cool. Oops, typo. Whatever. Let's deal with it later. Okay, kept for migrating the KCM to CCM. So I know Mike and I are kind of working on this already.
Yeah, I think this is probably 115-ish that we at least want to land the KEP so that we have a chance of getting implementation done soon after that.
Okay. So I'm going to put this in critical urgent then.
Yeah.
Walter, agree?
Definitely. I mean, I hate to say this, and I don't mean to add pressure, Mike, but I think practically it's going to be very hard to migrate existing customers on any cloud provider to CCM until this has not only been the KEP spin, but we need the feature built as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for 115, at the very least, we need like really well fleshed out KEP that is approved and signed off by whoever we need to get approval from. I think ideally, if we can get this earlier in the cycle and then get a head start on implementation, that'd be even better.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we could land implementation in 115, that'd be nice too.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know how we're going to argue the status, but presumably it's going to be marked as alpha when we first land it. And I don't know about anyone else, but we tend to not touch anything in GKE until it's at least hit beta.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a better case even for making sure we get it in 115 then.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we feel good about an alpha implementation of this KEP executed in 115 then?
I think it's an excellent idea. I mean, the idea between going from alpha and beta is always that we're allowed to change our minds on the alpha and fix the implementation. So from my perspective on this one, there's not a whole lot of difference between saying we have an alpha and saying we have a prototype.
Okay.
And I don't think this one exposes pretty much anything user controlled. So alpha to beta seems like we have a lot of leeway, I think, in this.
Well, and then the other thing I'll point out is that if my memory is correct on any of our proposals on this, you need the feature to be in release N-1 for you to go to release N.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So even if we say that the beta version gets into 116, that means that you can't actually do the migrate until you're going to 117.
Right. Is this a candidate for backport, or do we just not want to even touch that?
It's certainly a candidate. It's going to be a difficult argument, though, given that usually our requirement's the wrong word, but our requirement to be a backport is that it's be a bug fix and not a feature.
I feel that we could argue that.
Oh, I think we can argue it. I'm just saying it will be an uphill battle.
Fair enough.
Okay, so I'm going to add more details to this issue, but essentially this issue is just tracking the alpha implementation of that KEP that we just talked about, and I'm going to put that for milestone 115 and critical urgent. Okay. All right, next one is investigate usage requirements for cluster ID. So for more context, so from my understanding, cluster ID is a very AWS specific thing. I know GCP and other providers use it, but I think it's most used by AWS, and it's essentially used for resource isolation, making sure that your control plane is not going to delete any other resource that's in the same region but not owned by the cluster. So I know Justin and I had a few chats about this here, but the idea is it seems like in the kube controller manager, there's a log message there saying that it's a requirement to set the cluster to ID. And if you don't set it, then you have to put this like allow untagged cloud flag. So essentially we need to figure out, like, do we want to clean this up? Like, is this still a requirement or do we want to get rid of it? Anyone have opinions on this?
I think the other clouds need to do some investigation into whether or not they're actually using it before we make a determination.
Okay.
Well, is it blocking us from doing anything?
It doesn't sound like it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was hearing, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something.
Yeah, it's just nice to have cleaning up of all these flags we have that are effectively doing nothing for any other provider.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm all for saying let's investigate in 115, but it doesn't sound like there's anything we know of that we concretely need to do.
Yeah, sounds good. So put this, let's do important long-term, but milestone next. I have no idea if this will work, but I'll fix it later. Okay. Extracting, migrating the credential provider. So to clarify, credential provider is the kubelet provider for credentials to pull Docker images. Mike, you're still good to take this for 115?
Yeah. I think this one needs a KEP, so I'm still on the hook to kind of get that out there. But I think the implementation of this is kind of small as well. So let's shoot for 115.
Okay,
so I've tagged one or two members recently of Node on this one. The other thing is, I may be misremembering, but my impression was that 115 stops using Docker as its default.
This is also
okay.
integrated into the containerd strategy, into the CSI.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Because I was going to say, I think in 115 we switch over to containerd.
Yeah, this is used in both paths.
All right, cool.
Okay,
but I would definitely make sure that you're in contact. I agree that we need the KEP, and I also think that we need to make sure that we're working in conjunction with Node on this.
Okay.
Is there anyone from SIG Node specifically that we should CC here?
Don Chen
and Derek Carr. DEREK. Yeah.
That one. Okay. And okay, so milestone 115 priority. What do we want the priority to be for this one?
I mean, so this is an odd one, right? Technically, this is not cloud provider implementation code, but it might as well be.
It does anchor the cloud provider SDKs in Kubernetes in Kate's case.
Yeah,
Well, this
that's
is
the
why I
main
say.
motivation.
Sorry, what did you say, Andrew?
I was just saying that's one of the biggest motivations is that it's gonna block us from actually removing the
The
dependency.
SDKs. Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, it's technically not part of the cloud provider implementation, but it's still, yeah, it's still anchoring cloud provider code. So
If it's blocking the removal, it's critical urgent.
Works for me. Okay, so at least the cap and alpha, I don't think it'd be reasonable to like do anything more than that for this one. Okay. All right. So this issue, investigate API throttling and node controller. This was brought up by the Alibaba folks. They apparently have customers with 1,000 node clusters, and the node controller is getting throttled because it's doing the node address update every whatever the recent period is. So they asked that we try to look into this for 115. I'm gonna try to actually get the Alibaba folks to do this one, but in terms of like
do we know, is this throttling in the API server?
this is throttling in the Cube controller and the Cloud Controller Manager.
When we say throttling, I mean, I am not aware of a throttle in the controllers or the controller managers. I am aware that when the controllers make requests of the API server will throttle them.
Sorry, yeah, let me clarify. So this is actually that the node controller is too aggressive in the way it calls the cloud provider, and so the controller is throttled by the provider. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
OpenStack clouds have experienced this too, where the cloud controller manager is hitting the cluster, the host cloud API a lot, and they wind up rate limiting them out. And I think we might have some upstream patches that try to limit some of this, or just set it to be tunable. But I don't know if it's a general solution that we have in the controllers.
Okay, playing devil's advocate for a second. If we're talking about a cloud-specific controller, I'm all for us providing guidance, ... Why is this a general problem?
Yeah, so the issue, I mainly opened the issue to see, to answer exactly that question is like, for large scale clusters, are we seeing this in other providers? And if so, like, what would a general purpose solution for this look like? Or what can we at least do to like the interface or something to make it more, less of a hassle to try to account for this?
I definitely think it's an interesting question, but
yeah.
Okay, so for AWS GCP, like this is not a problem even for large clusters.
Well, and I think if it were to become one, I mean, we certainly have throttles built into, at least on the GCE side, we have throttling built into our Cloud SDK. So we would throttle in that way, and we do a pushback throttle.
Yeah, I would consider it to be a cloud provider issue if there was a common solution that everybody would want to implement. But as it stands right now, if it's Alibaba and OpenStack, the only clouds that are complaining about this, and we have solutions in place, then we should just solve the solutions that best meet our needs. I would just like to see it be a general solution if everybody needs it as a general solution, or a general solution is, if everybody's implementing the same solution, then one could be better than N.
I would agree with that, but I mean, the other thing I would add would be, if this were something that were happening in the KCM, where the KCM needed to be throttled, I could see where it's like, okay, that has to be a Kubernetes solution. Node controller is a little vague, but I'm assuming that what they mean is the node is something like, in fact, it's not even clear to me which controller they mean, but I mean, if it were, for instance, the node IPAM controller making cloud provider calls, that's going to be something that they should be running in the CCM, and then it's up to it is at least potentially something they can fix.
Okay, so I'll leave this issue for now, and then I'll follow up with them and see if they can implement something either in their SDK or some other thing. Stephen, do you know if this is a issue in Azure at all? or have you seen it at all in Azure?
I haven't personally seen it. We've had some weird timeout things, but I don't think any of it's related to the node controller. Some of them are like disk attaches and load balancer reconcilers. So.
Okay.
Well, and also if you could find out which controller, because we haven't had a generic node controller in like 3 or 4 releases.
This is the node controller in the CCM specifically that does node registration and updates.
Got it. Okay. So that's like what, the cloud node controller?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'll leave this for now then. Yeah, this is the same thing. They have the same issue with routes. I know Azure had it at one point, but then they implemented caching. So it's not really a problem anymore. So yeah, I can follow up with them either, unless other providers here do see issues with routes, route controller being a bit too aggressive. Okay, I'll take that as a no. Okay, finalizer protection for service load balancers. This is, okay, so there are 2 PRs open that have been open for like 2 years now or something like that. This is essentially adding finalizers to the services that create load balancers. This is to make sure that if you accidentally delete the load balancer, but the delete operation against the load balancer fails. Sorry, let me backtrack. This is if you delete the service, but the operation to delete the load balancer fails, then you have a dangling load balancer that's not going to be cleaned up. So the reason why this is a little bit tricky is because for backwards compatibility, you have to add support in one release to actually check the finalizer. And then in the future release, then you can actually add the finalizer. And this is important because if you were to add the finalizer from the start and then you roll back, then you have a cluster where there's a finalizer, but then there's nothing checking the finalizer anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. How do people feel about this? Is this a problem for a lot of users, like having load balancers that are just not owned by anything?
It's a problem, but I mean, it is generally, at least on the GKE side, an annoyance rather than anything worse than that. We do occasionally get dangling load balancers today. We have tools to let the customer clean them up or to let our SRE team clean them up.
Yeah.
And obviously, that's not ideal, but
I've seen the same issue in OpenStack load balancers also, and similar to Walter, we our issues have gone deeper because it exposed some problems with how load balancers are created in OpenStack and the barrier between user and administrator privilege levels. But I don't know if a solution necessarily needs to happen in here.
Okay, I'm gonna put this in the 115 milestone, but I'm gonna put it important long term, because I know Josh at Oracle might be willing to do this for 115, and if not, I'd be willing to do this myself. So if there are no objections, I'm just gonna do priority important long term.
you may want to check with networking. I know this is something that flits across their queue as well.
Yeah, it's on their radar. I think Boe is looking at those PRs as well. But yeah, I'll definitely go to SIG Network as well and make sure that it's on their radar.
Yep.
And this is going to span multiple releases anyways. So like, I think at least for 115, we want to get in the first PR that does the finalizer check, and then for 116, we can try to actually add finalizer support. Okay, nodes are being registered multiple times in the Cloud Controller Manager. So someone opened an issue that has it's a very descriptive issue on the Cloud Controller Manager registering nodes multiple times.
Wow, props for good issue.
Yeah, so yeah, I'd say like read this issue. I think what's happening is that because the CCM does it checks like the taint, like a node taint to see if it should register the node. I think there's multiple events going through the controller before the taint is removed. So this is kind of like the proposed solution in this issue, at least, is to keep track of like what nodes are currently being registered via a map, and then if a node is currently being registered, then just ignore it in future events.
Oh, I'm sorry, being kept where?
Like just a local map in the controller. So like once you run like initialize node, then you store the node in the map, and then that ensures that future events aren't also going to kick off the same registration code path.
So that seems very brittle.
Yep, I think it could be brittle if you don't do it right.
Well, not just if you don't do it right, right? What happens if my controller manager crashes?
Yeah, in that case, you would just the map would be clear, and then you would just re-register. Like worst case scenario is you would rerun those registration code paths, but then it wouldn't be like, at least you're not like that. That's what we have today, anyways. So like worst case scenario is we'd fall back to whatever we have today.
Oh, that's true. It just seems like what we really need to do is make the registration idempotent.
Yeah. So the registration is idempotent. The problem though is that if you run the registration loop multiple times, you do like each registration loop, depending on the provider, is like 5 to 6 API calls. And so the problem is like to reduce, it's mainly to reduce the number of API calls.
Okay, so this is really more of an optimization than a correctness issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. I'd say 115, but important long term.
Mm-hmm.
I hate this MacBook keyboard. Okay, so the next three are removing Overt, CloudStack, and Photon. So DIMS already has a PR open for that. They've been deprecated for about a year, and it seems like people in the community are okay to remove it from Kubernetes core. So I say we just put these all in critical urgent.
Sounds good.
All right, I'll do this. I can do this later. Just running out of time.
I don't think it's critical urgent, but like it can be something that's done in milestone 115.
Okay, that's fair. Wouldn't be the worst thing if they were in there for another release. So I guess important soon.
Yeah. Did we added the deprecation warning, right? To their, yeah. So
I think it's in everywhere.
They should know. They should be aware.
Okay, yeah, I'll follow up with DIMS and make sure there's the proper warnings and announcements, make sure people are aware. Okay, cool. I'm gonna stop sharing. All right, cool. I think that's it for the agenda. Let me just double check. All right, so there's one more thing. If anyone wants to submit a session for the contributor summit for KubeCon EU, let me know and we can try to plan something for that. I think it might be good to have maybe a co-session with cluster lifecycle on like all the cluster API stuff and how we're going to integrate the providers. I think that might be a good session to have. But yeah, let me know if you want to do something for the contributor summit.
Yeah, I'll be there and I can help out with any of that.
So one thing to mention before we go. So we're planning on SIG PM, that is. We're planning on running from SIG to SIG and talking about KEPs a little bit. Are your experience with KEPs thus far? Y'all have been filing quite a bit of them and doing them consistently and well. So we're interested in getting feedback. That was coming soon, probably around the start of 115. So stay tuned.
Awesome, thanks.
Also, Andrew, it was done in a different SIG, which is, I think, it was either done in a different SIG or you guys did it before I got here. But I think for us, one of the important KEPs is the network proxy KEP, because we are not going to get cloud provider out of Kube API server until that lands.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm going to create an issue for that actually right now. But I would think that's 115 and critical urgent as well.
Even though I'm on the hook and I dread it, I would tend to agree.
Okay, awesome. Cool. Anything else? I think we're out of time.
So quickly, We put together a State of the Union for cloud provider, with which you wrote the original version of. There were some notes in there on blocking items. Have we made sure that all the blocking items from that doc have made it into tickets?
I need to double check that, but I will do that, and then I'll kind of pipe them to the backlog if we have to. So like I'm planning on doing another round of going through the backlog in a future meeting. So in case anyone else has opinions on those things, we can get their opinion on that. Okay, cool. All right, we're out of time. So thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.